Hi all, I have an exceptionally interesting game of Magnus Carlsen to show you today. This was played in the Gashimov Memorial 2018. Magnus Carlsen was with the white pieces. Radoslaw Wojtaszek was with the black pieces, one of the top Polish players in the world, currently ranking around 21 on the FIDE top 100 list. Let's see what happened in this game. E4 from Magnus. We see Sicilian defence, c5. Knight c3, as if a closed variation, which usually white plays g3, but here we see d4. And you might think, isn't this a bit silly, because isn't it possible now that because you haven't played knight f3, you're not going to be able to recapture the knight, so you don't really want the queen out? That's breaking a beginner's rule of chess, isn't it? Bringing the queen out too early. Subject to tempo gain. Black did get the tempo gain. The interesting thing here is another kind of rule breaking move, queen d2, blocking in the bishop. You might think, well, surely this bishop had a nice view on the diagonal, but there's method in the madness here. This is actually quite well known. We see knight f6, and now the idea is to fianchetto this bishop, b3, e6, bishop b2. So white is ready to castle queenside. It's quite an unusual variation of the Sicilian. a6, white castles queenside, b5, and now sometimes maybe b4 is useful for black to try and win a pawn. So f3 supports e4. On the other hand, it is a little bit dangerous, even if knight f3, this is a little bit dangerous. If black is a bit greedy, there seems, according to Stockfish, it's going to be some interesting compensation emerging. There's quite a bit of pressure here. You can see it's an interesting gambit in its own right. So anyway, f3 was played, which deprives the knight now of the key f3 square. So where is this knight going? Is it going to go to e2? We see h5. Now that looks a little bit unusual. You might think, what's going on here? Just to stop g4, this has been played. But where is black's king going to live after this? And isn't g5 a kind of weakness more pronounced with h5? Well, this has been seen before, this position. Bishop e7 has been tried before. For example, Krasnowski against Bashirili in Budapest 2019 was a draw with bishop e7, and that went on like that. And black castled queenside, and it was ending in a draw quite later at move 47. So h5 is a bit committal. We see knight h3. So the knight is not content with e2. It wants to go into that g5 square. Bishop e7, and it goes into g5. And then we see h4. It's already a little bit unsafe for black to castle. If black castles, white could now play, with the knight actually supporting e4, white could play f4, because now b4 is not, there's no problem with e4. And if, for example, this position, white can get a very strong attacking position, even just winning h5, targeting h5 there, that's a target. So this kind of thing is going to favour white for a kingside attack. For example, there's a lot of dangerous lines here if this happens, if black castles kingside. So for example, if we take this variation a bit more seriously, I'm playing knight d7 for example, then knight d4, and this bishop on the diagonal is also, you can see it's quite dangerous. If e5, black's going to end up potentially getting mated. For example, that nudges the queen away from that diagonal, and nasty things could happen like this checkmate. So it does seem all in all quite dangerous for black to consider castling. So we see h4, and now f4 here. So the knight's supporting e4 against b4, so there's no problem with e4 at the moment. Bishop b7, we see king b1. Rook c8, so black is trying to play without castling. Will this work? Bishop e2, queen c7, rook h e1, so nicely centralizing. The rooks are kind of mocking the opponent's less coordinated rooks. They're kind of elegant in the center. We see knight h7. If black castles here, then bishop d3 for example, and just queen f2, and that h pawn is a real liability to be picked off. White's getting a big advantage there. So knight h7, knight takes, rook takes, and you might think, can black survive this? With the king in the center, this is a kind of interesting move, knight d5, which would need extreme calculation. With the king in the center here, at this point, this turns out to be very favourable for white. So for example, bishop d3, and there's with the bishop pinned in the centre, there's things like this, and check, and picking up the rook. If the rook went to h8, then bishop takes g7, and then bishop f6. So it seems, yeah, there was a point in this game, instead of g4, there was knight d5. It seems rather crushing, that you'd have to be like a computer perhaps to calculate it very well and accurately. So if king f8, then bishop d3 hitting the rook, and this just ends up with a big advantage for white here. So anyway, well, Magnus plays a really aggressive move, g4. If left alone now, it seems as though, you know, one idea might be g5 and g6 to try and undermine e6. So for example, a move like bishop g4 would then also hit e6 and strike at the c8 rook as well with tempo. So that kind of plan is dangerous. Black tried to delay things with hg, and now bishop f6 targeting c3 sometimes. So bishop d3, rook h8, getting it out of the way of e5, which would expose an attack on the rook. So the rook moving back in advance, g4. So there's still a potential plan of g5, g6. It looks quite dangerous for black's pawn structure and king safety. Knight d4 with the immediate tactical threat of knight f3. And it looks as though also sometimes knight takes b3 is going to be good for bishop takes c3, with a lot of pressure on c3. But Magnus's move parries actually both threats, parries both knight f3 and indirectly knight takes b3 here. Black played king f8. Knight takes b3 would be a big mistake here on a takes, bishop takes. It's setting a trap, rook e3, because bishop takes b5, check, winning the queen. So black played king f8, and now again renewing kind of the threat of knight takes b3. Now knight e2, knight takes e2, rook takes, and it looks as though isn't black simplifying enough. Bishop c3 is played to try and even perhaps get the queens off. Bishop takes b2 leaves white with a nice edge with g5. That's still that plan of g6 to undermine the pawn chain. So bishop c3 to try and get at least an aggressive looking queen on c3. Now queen e3 keeping the attacking tension going, rook c5, and also queen e3 of course now supports e5. D takes is played on d5, f5. This looks actually like a kind of French defense gone wrong here. So for example, the f file is pretty lethal. If white can just double on the f file with queen g5 check, that's going to pick up material if nothing else. So e5, d takes, f takes. We have rook h1 trying to exchange off the attacking pieces. On king g8 instead, there's queen g5. For example, this is just super dangerous now with that d8. For example, here, this will be crashing through with mating implication. So we have rook h1, that's taken, but now rook h2, and it's still very dangerous with black's king and this back row and things like queen g5. We have rook takes e5. This is just a lost position. If the bishop went back to d5, then there's check, check here, check here, queen d6, rook b8, and queen b6 checkmate. And even quicker is if the bishop went here, because that's actually represents an escape exit for the black king being removed. So it's actually a quicker checkmate like this, checkmate. So yeah, this is a very difficult position. Black tried this, but now check, and in fact now white gains a key tempo. Can you see, if I give you 5 seconds, what does white play here to gain a key tempo? Okay, queen a7 check. Yeah, just needs that check to win the bishop. The game ended here, so just taking on bishop is absolutely winning. So yeah, a fascinating game, quite a novel approach again to the Sicilian defence. It's funny, you look at some of the master games and you see that actually, you know, they do play really quite originally, it seems, sometimes against what you'd think is kind of very, very standard opening. All of a sudden the queen's out and about, the queen's blocking the bishop, but it all starts to make sense later. So very original play by Magnus Carlsen in this game. Some of the kibitzers at chessgames.com thought it was like kind of, you know, really quite innovative in the opening. I feel so as well. There's, a great surprise weapon here for all of us to use, basically, against the main, Sicilian defence, one of the big 4 chess openings against 1e4. So something to bear in mind. An instructive, interesting, and entertaining game. So well done, Magnus Carlsen, again for this brilliant game in 2018, celebrating Gashimov, who was a fantastic talent in his own right. Who I saw once at Gibraltar. I saw him, So he was an absolutely fantastic player. This Gashimov memorial in respect to him, really nice memorial to respect that great player. Okay, hope you enjoyed this game. If you did, etc., please check out the bit.ly link there. You can play me or other YouTubers. I'm playing quite a lot of you on chessworld.net, a lot of fun. So that bit.ly link, 2 capital Y, small v, small a, 5 capital M, capital B, as though it's 5 megabytes at the end. So check out that link or the link in the description. Okay, thanks very much.